Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to yet another edition of the Right Circle series. I have lost count of how many we've done. If one of you knows, please let us know. Meeta's unavailable this evening. Something's come up. She sends apologies to all of you, but it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to Right Circle with Yashaswini Chandra in conversation with Swati Vashisht. You guys all know a little bit about both of them, but just to introduce both our speakers once again, Yashaswini is the author of The Tale of the Horse, a history of India on horseback. She is a PhD in the history of art, has been a teaching fellow at the SOAS University of London, has worked in Sahapedia, an online open resource platform for arts, culture, history of India. She will be in conversation with Swati Vashisht, who to all of us here is no stranger. We've all seen her, we've all met with her in the past, and we love her. Over to you guys. Looking forward to another great session. Someone like me who's obsessed with mythology in medieval India, I think this is going to be super fun. Over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Urvi. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this truly special session of the Right Circle with Yashaswini Chandra on her book, The Tale of the Horse, History of India on Horseback. The book is a monograph on the intertwined history of the horse and humankind, focusing on medieval to modern period in the subcontinent, where the author virtually accompanies the reader on horseback across the historical landscape in a storytelling adventure. She leads with a cavalry of research material, mythology, history, listings, gazettes, art historical sources, folklore, oral traditions, and what have you. From time to time, galloping into the thick of action, ranging from trade and transport of the horse in India, war and indulgence on horseback, love and longing. On other occasions, she lends the reader with a pair of binoculars to immerse themselves in some wondrous scenes unfolding. For instance, British and Indian women, horse finding centrality in Mughal and Rajput courts, polo matches in progress, heroic horse tales set in the Thar Desert, but very significantly moving beyond the elite and the horse, whose lives trot alongside that of the horse. In this session, over the next few minutes, we hope to offer you a glimpse into the refreshing style, format, and content of this book, which richly explores a subject that is relatively lesser written about. That, in fact, Yashaswini, is a good place to begin. What really drove you to write this book? What made you decide to tell the tale of the horse?
Hi, Swati. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction to the book. I'm very pleased to be having this conversation with you. And I'm very grateful to Meeta, the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, Right Circle, and all their partners for inviting me. The book certainly comes from, it certainly comes from a place of personal interest. As we've discussed, I ride. I have a horse of my own, and I've been very enthusiastic about horses for a very long time. And, in 2016, I had the opportunity to co-edit a volume on the President's Bodyguard, the household cavalry of the Indian's head of state. And that was an incredible experience. It was an eye-opening experience because I realized that horses are not just great fun to ride, but it can be a pleasure writing about them, that they lend themselves to a very rich study of history. I mean, so closely have the histories of horses and humans been intertwined. And when I was researching that volume, where I remember reading somewhere in the records that at the time of independence, there was a big debate. There was a discussion about what to do with these horse regiments. There were one or two horse regiments, the President's Bodyguard, of course, which was then known as the Governor General's Bodyguard. And I think finally the decision was taken that the feeling was perhaps that these horse regiments, should be mechanized. But then there was that realization, and the decision was taken that no, these regiments should be allowed to remain the way that they are, because they are a reminder of that historical relationship. Things might have
Right.
changed drastically in the modern mechanized era, but it's important to memorialize that relationship, that historical partnership between humans and horses. So I was very struck by that. I was amazed that there's so little literature on the horse, to the extent that the horse is referenced in works of Indian history, modern works of Indian history. It's viewed along very utilitarian, very prosaic lines. There hasn't been a concern with the multifaceted significance of the horse. I mean, the horse hasn't been treated as this living, feeling being. And so I thought, this will surely lend itself to something quite worthwhile. And I really must say I enjoyed researching and writing about this topic. So yeah,
That's
where
in
it
fact,
comes
you do
from.
break that. You're right. You break that sort of notion that the reading that one has had so far on horse and its partnership with human beings. So, and you do point out in the book that it is largely concerned with the history of the horse in medieval period, and it has a section on Rajasthan, as you read on. Considering the history of the horse goes back much longer, and there are other regions where there was prominent horse culture, what informed the selection for you?
So, I mean, yeah, it's true. The book is mainly concerned with the medieval, the early modern periods, but I didn't want the story to begin or end abruptly. So even if in broad strokes, it was important to address the early history of the horse in India in the ancient period, and also sort of bring it into the colonial period, because that's why the rupture comes. That's when the scene changes drastically, and
Right.
the traditional horse culture of India begins to be lost. And in any case, that period, the colonial period, also corresponded with mechanization, when the horse in any case was becoming redundant.
Correct.
And as far as Rajasthan is concerned, I mean, in terms of the structure of the book, I decided that there would be a prologue which would address, which would set the stage and address the ancient history of the horse in India, and would also like lay out the scope of the book. And then that there would be chapters concerned with the Indian overview. So different parts of India, different regions of India, some of the key
Right.
historical moments in which the horse was crucial. And then I decided to dedicate a number of chapters to Rajasthan. I decided to make a case study of Rajasthan for various reasons. I mean, on a very prosaic note, it's one of my areas of research. So I felt comfortable taking a very close look at it. And second of all, for very good reasons. I mean, of all the horse territories of India, Rajasthan is the one that is best known to date for that. And there's also been a certain amount of romanticization of Rajasthan as the land of horse warriors. But you do realize that historically Rajasthan was central. I mean, its location was such, it was not only breeding its own horses, but also it was located between two regions through which horses were imported into India from Central Asia and the Middle East. And it
Right.
had all these horse fairs, it had a pastoral nomadic culture. So, I mean, all of that came together. So there were very good reasons, I think, for me to choose Rajasthan. And of
Right. And
course, I
some
do
of
have a soft spot for it also. There's no denying it.
yes, that comes through. So you begin the book with mythological references to the horse, perhaps to drive home the point about how long back the significance and centrality of the horse goes in human scheme of things. And this is across religions and geographies. So there is the origin myth of Ucheshravas, quote, that priceless jewel of a stallion, unquote, out of the churning of the ocean. Then there is a horse in the Islamic lore, there's horse in Buddhism. So there is a sense of it enjoying more or less a similar place of prominence across religious pantheons, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I'll share my screen so I can show some images. Desktop. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, but the rest of this, yeah, now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, so I mean, there is this tendency to begin with origin myths, and origin myths are that much more important when the beginning of something is not recorded in a conventional sense, because they do give us insights about how normally it's in relation to people. So how, say how a community of people emerged, how they saw themselves, how they projected themselves. But the two origin myths about the appearance of the horse on the Indian scene are very evocative, and they immediately, they immediately sort of impress the significance of the horse to Indian culture. So I thought that that would be an important note to begin with. But before I proceed to that, the book, actually, the color section opens with this beautiful photograph by my friend Dinesh Khanna, the photographer par excellence. And I thought to begin with this, I thought to begin the color section in the book with this image, because first of all, it's a reminder of the historical horse culture of India, which sort of totters along into the present. And I mean, it evokes a number of distinctive features of the horse culture of India. You know, the fondness for piebald horses or black and white horses, the tendency to decorate horses with henna,
Yeah.
to beautify them. Then it also evokes a number of very powerful legends about the riderless horse of the desert, which I'll come to. And of course, this is a scene from Pushkar, which was
Right.
which has been at the heart of the horse scene of Rajasthan, the western frontier, in fact, and which to date is highly celebrated. So, I mean, going back to the origin myths, yeah, there are two. One is, of course, about Uchchai Shravas and the Samudra Manthan, how the Devas and the Asuras got together and churned the ocean, and a number of treasures emerged, one of which was the horse. I mean, this is a legend that is cited in both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Uchchai Shravas is effectively the primordial horse. It's this dazzling white stallion, right? And the stallion chooses the side of the gods. So that indicates right at the outset the elitism that was attached to the horse, the divine qualities that was attached to the horse. Then the other origin myths appears in the Shalihotra or Ashvashastra tradition, in which the horses are winged creatures of heaven. And in most cases, it is said that the sage, the ancient sage Shalihotra, who is sort of the grandfather of horse knowledge in India, he cast a spell by which these horses lost their wings so to be able to pull the chariots in Indra's army. And
Right.
there is, however, one beautiful rendition that I found, in which case they were quite naughty, they were quite wild and mischievous, these winged horses of heaven. And so Indra got very cross with them and ripped off those wings, and so they descended on earth. And that's how we received horses. I mean, these are both, I mean, they both reveal the exalted beginnings of the horse in the Indian imagination. You know, the horse was from reading these myths, learning about these myths, that the horse was going to be valorized in India. And yeah, so I think and to me they were also sort of evocative of two of the main sources from which horses were imported to India through much of its history, from across the Arabian Sea, from the Middle East, and from Central Asia, which of course is described as Bame Dunya, or the roof of the world. So, you know, practically
Yes.
touching heaven. But these, then even in Buddhist law, the horse is very important. We all know about how Buddha saw these four sights. He was a prince. He saw these four sights. He was jolted. He received a great jolt. He realized that life is futile. He embarked on a path to gain enlightenment. You know, he was finally released from the endless cycle of birth and rebirths. But what we don't realize is that when he gave up, worldly life, when he gave up his princely life, he actually departed on the path to gain enlightenment on his horse, Kantaka. And the gods manifested, the devas manifested to hold up the horse so that the sound of the hoofbeats do not rouse the palace and he's not prevented on leaving for this all important journey, right? And in ancient Buddhist art, very often this incident, this episode known as the Great Departure from the life of the Buddha, is represented symbolically as a horse. So,
Right.
I mean, my point is that we very often miss how the horse has been a silent witness, how the horse has been a sentinel to some of the most crucial moments in our history and culture. Then, even in Islamic lore, the horse is very important. Burak was not a horse, that was a riding animal, a fantastical riding animal that combined a lot of attributes, including elements of the horse, right? And it's described quite magnificently. And there are very rich descriptions of Burak, in which its eyes are compared to jewels. It's it's supposed to. It's just really quite fabulous. There are these fabulous descriptions, and the Prophet Muhammad is supposed to have ridden it from Jerusalem to Mecca, and then perhaps on to heaven. So Burak was sacrosanct in Islamic in the Islamic tradition. In any case, even in India, after the coming of Islam, a horse was very often paid the highest compliment when it was compared to Burak, right?
Right.
And then there's also the horse that is enshrined in Shia Islam, that is Zuljana, who was the
Right.
horse of Hussein, the fourth Caliph Ali's son, who was who was martyred at the Battle of Karbala, right? And his stallion, his white stallion, raced back to his camp to inform the women folk of his martyrdom. And so to date in South Asia, this, the processions, the Karbala processions on Ashura, the 10th day of Muharram, is led by a white riderless horse.
Right.
Then incredibly, I found this amazing painting in Jaipur at the Albert Hall Museum. This is a 19th century Mughal painting. This one, I'm afraid I don't have a very good picture, which depicts the last journey of the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah, one of the later Mughals. And you can see how the procession is led by his riderless horse, right? So that motif, reminiscent of Hussein's horse at Karbala, but this is in fact a pre-Islamic Iranian tradition that was transported and adapted in India. So much so that the riderless horse again appears in the folk romance of Mirza Sahiban, one of the great.
Hold on to that, because I will come to that separately.
Okay.
Hold on to that thought of Mirza Sahiban. It's before that. I want to touch upon how it's interesting how you mentioned the fact that the horse comes up in the Rig Veda 215 times, which is 39 times more than the cow.
Everybody keeps asking me about that.
Yes, but it's a very interesting fact, because it is just so hard to come to terms with, given how things are in the current context. How and when do you think it lagged?
It's a reminder. I think it's a very powerful, very potent reminder of how significant horses once were. The thing is, the cow hasn't become redundant. Whether you think of universally, and especially, of course, in the Indian context, it's neither has its utilitarian purpose diminished, and if in anything in India, its cultural significance has increased, it's come to be revered, then obviously its status has also been politicized. But what this reference reminds us is that once the horse was also extremely important to the Indo-Aryan culture. Of course, that is very well documented, that's very well known, that the the main means of transport and war for the Indo-Aryans was the horse-drawn chariot. And that the Ashwamedh Yagya in Vedic culture was the highest ritual performed by the greatest of kings. So, I mean, all of that is very well known. So not just with reference to Indo-Aryan or Vedic culture, but also to humankind, to human history in general. I think that is what it reminds us. The cow is very much part of our consciousness. It's there, you know, but the horse has disappeared, and that is the result. That is an outcome of mechanization.
Right.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to note that horse, however, is virtually absent in the Vahana space, where you have a range of animals from Nandi, the bull, the tiger, the goddess, appears only in chariots of the sun god and Krishna. Until there's mention of Kalki, Vishnu's yet to be incarnation. It does make an entry as Vahana for the folk deities, though. So you have Gogaji, Ramdev Peer, Tejaji, Babuji, among others, who are riders in their iconography. How does this transformation come about?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question. And I've been, since we had a chat about the book, I've actually been thinking about that. But I think, I mean, if we look at the Vahana space, it's a diversity of animals. I don't think any animal is repeated. I think each god or goddess has a distinctive mount, right? Has a unique mount. And so,
right.
I mean, I think the whole point is that the entire gamut of the animal kingdom being represented and being associated with the gods and goddesses. So the horse, of course, is the seven horses draw the chariot of Surya. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Kartik is also sometimes represented on a horse, as mounted on a horse, though of course his primary vehicle is the peacock. And then Kalki. Then actually the horse is quite significant in the sense that the Ashwins, yeah, the twin gods, who were the actual father of the younger Pandava brothers, Nakul and Sahadev, they are represented as horse-headed, right? Then, of course, Kalki is represented as mounted on a horse, or even horse-headed, or symbolically as a horse. There are these wonderful Pahadi paintings in which possibly Kalki is also represented as the groom of a white stallion, although it's open to interpretation. Kalki could just as well be represented by the warrior, and the groom is leading his mount to him, or the horse itself might represent Kalki, right? Then, yeah, and then of course, these are normative. So far, we've been talking about sort of normative, classical, broad, widespread traditions, right? But in the sort of the galaxy of folk cultures of India that are of course unique to different regions, the horse is quite important. Like, just to give you examples from the Western frontier, in Kutch, there are 72 equestrian deities that are worshipped, the so-called Jaks, who are said to have come from across the sea and liberated the local population from a tyrant. Then Revant, who is the god of horses, is again symbolically represented as a horse and is found in most Rajput stables, traditional Rajput stables to date. Then the deified dead of Rajasthan, so these heroic warriors who were very often, cow protectors, deliverers, supposed to be deliverers of justice. They are iconized, they are immortalized as horse riders, right? So I think that is broadly why it is, and perhaps because the horse became more of a kingly symbol than a divine creature.
Right. And your references to Kalki, in fact, remind me that Jaipur has the only temple in the country that is dedicated exclusively to Kalki, the Lord, the incarnate of Lord Vishnu. Yeah. And the
Swati, your voice is breaking up tiny bit.
Which I was also thinking about. Interesting thing about this temple, which was built by the founder ruler of Jaipur, Maharaja Savai Jai Singh II, who also incidentally did the Ashwamedh Yagya, which finds a mention in the book, is that it has a ramp leading up to it and not stairs. So if you go up there, the priest will show you an exquisitely sculpted marble life-size of the Dark Age, which is underway.
Right.
Following which Lord he will mount it to go usher the world into another cycle of time, the Satyug. And the idea behind the ramp instead of stairs, as many of you may have guessed, and probably many of you from Jaipur would know, is for the ease of Kalki on horseback to trot out of the temple.
Oh, that's incredible.
You know, so, but the book, but the book has vivid descriptions of the scale of trade and transport of horse in the medieval India as well. So especially where you discuss how the horse was brought through the sea. Not just a nightmare for the horses, but quite literally killing for many. What made it economically viable despite that?
Sorry, shall I show you some images? I have to keep going back and forth. So basically there were, I mean, horses couldn't be bred in India to the extent that it met the entire demand for horses. Plus certain elite classes definitely had a preference for foreign imported horses. And there were two main sources. One, of course, one from about the 10th century was the Middle East by the sea route. So, you know, from the Middle East, from across the Arabian Sea, right? And it was an absolute ordeal for the horses, because you can imagine a bunch of horses being packed into these ships like sardines in a tin, and you know, with all the food and the water, drinking water for that entire journey, also packed along with them, all of which would deteriorate over time, right? And it was just, and you know, obviously the conditions would be very unsanitary, and you can just imagine the horses, the amount of dung and urine they would have been produced, all of which of course would have to be thrown overboard. There are some very evocative descriptions. Abdullah Wasaf, an Iranian traveler who arrives at a port in India, talks about, oh my God, the smell from those horses, I thought my nose would burst. I felt faint, you know, the smell from those ships. I thought I'll swoon. I felt faint. But such was the demand, because from the 12th century onwards, even cavalry warfare had even caught on in South India. Such was the demand, such was the requirement, that rulers were prepared to pay for horses that weren't even delivered based on pre-orders. So as long as a trader showed, you know, proof of the horse having existed, ears, tails, these bits were obviously hacked off before the horse's carcass was thrown overboard, you know, just to incentivize this trade. And you get references from the Pandya kingdom to Tipu Sultan. So this was a concern throughout. And it doesn't seem like in South India too many horses were bred until much later, from about the 15th, 16th century. And then, of course, so this is I thought a very evocative, this is a very telling depiction, a mural painting from a temple in Tamil Nadu of that all-important sea trade. Then the other source was Central Asia, right? And right up to the Eurasian steppes. Ibn Battuta at one point encountered, you know, found that a herd of horses, I forget the exact number, but it was quite a huge number, a few thousand horses, were traveling to India for sale in India, right? And he left a very colorful description. And this was right by the Black Sea. So all the way from the, extreme end of the Eurasian steppes, horses were being imported from the Central Asian heartland, from northern Afghanistan, all of this through Afghanistan. Naturally, the Afghans made the most of this trade, and they emerged as the main traders, the main merchants. And it gave them a lot of opportunities because, again, there was such a great demand for horses. If horses from the Middle East were considered the most prestigious, then the horses from Central Asia, the largest number of horses to be imported into India were from Central Asia. So you have these colonial period representations of Afghan horse traders. And the thing about Rajasthan, one of the reasons why Rajasthan is important, I'm sorry, my map is a bit blurry, is because it was very much in the thick of things. So horses are being imported through Afghanistan by overland routes, through Multan and later Shikarpur, as well as, Peshawar, right? No, especially the routes connecting Afghanistan to Multan and Shikarpur, right? Through Bahawalpur, Bikaner and Jaisalmer, they used to effectively enter through Punjab and Rajasthan, Punjab, Sindh, Rajasthan. And then, of course, a lot of the horses were also imported by sea, arrived at the ports of Gujarat. So Cambay, Surat. So again, to get to, say, the imperial center in Agra or Delhi, they would have to travel through through Rajasthan, which was effectively became a trade corridor. And, so that's one of the reasons why Rajasthan emerged as so vital
as a case study also for your book. Yes.
Yeah.
So you also bring out the human horse partnership with several accounts in the book, but there's one very important one. Also talks about the ill-fated omen of a riderless horse that we were just discussing. Take us through that briefly, and if you have something to show.
Okay, so this is Mirza Sahiban.
Right.
Yeah. So, of course, Mirza Sahiban is one of the great romances of India. It's very well known, one of the doomed romances of Punjab, Sindh. And what was extraordinary, I read two studies of the two historical renditions of the legend. Obviously, the legend is to date retold. But in those two historical renditions, in Mirza, so Mirza compares his horse. So he's also set to elope with Sahiban, his beloved, whom he's not being allowed to marry, who's supposed to be married off to someone else. So he wants to elope with her on his horse. And he compares his horse to Burak, the Prophet Muhammad's horse, right?
Right.
And then there is the horse is sort of given semi-magical attributes, and ultimately, of course, what happens is that they do elope, and they end up. Mirza very foolishly decides to take a break and sleep under the Jahan tree. In the meanwhile, they're pursued by Sahiban's father and brothers. Mirza was supposed to have been a great archer, but Sahiban was very much concerned. I think we all know the story, but just to quickly go through the, the gist of it.
Right.
Mirza was a great archer. He was quite relaxed. He thought he can afford to take a break because he'll be able to strike the brothers down if they do turn up. And Sahiban was concerned. There was a clear moral dilemma because on the one hand, she has a loyalty towards her lover, and then on the other hand, she wants to ensure that her father and her brother are not killed. So she hid his bow, and he was killed by her family.
Right.
And she, of course, a historical case of honor killing. She was hung from the branches of the Jahan tree, right? And then the horse, Sahiban, Mirza's horse, evoking the riderless horse of Karbala, races back to his village and informs his family. So once again, the horse appears as an ill-fated omen, a messenger of death, right?
Right.
And so there are all these incredible layers to the history of the horse in India. there are all these layers of significance that, you know, that surround it.
Right.
This is one
One of
example.
the most, yes, one of the most remarkable aspects of the book to me is that it seeks to do gender justice. And that is why we
course.
need more women writers and feminist writers. You dig out stories and accounts of horse women against the odds of precious little work that exists in that space. How challenging was it to extract information on some of these accounts?
Super challenging, incredibly challenging. But I refuse to believe that women didn't ride in India. So I thought I'll use my imagination and be creative and dig around a little bit. And like I
Right.
told you, I mean, I'm coming to this book as a horsewoman, and I was very sure that I just don't want to write about like great men on horseback. But again, art historical sources presented a few breakthroughs. For example, there's this historical painting from the Akbarnama, or the Chronicle of Mughal Emperor Akbar. And in this painting, at the center of the painting is Akbar's mother, the Dowager Queen, returning from Kabul. And of course, Akbar is welcoming her back home, and she is riding. She is sitting in the palanquin, right? But if you can see in one corner, she is escorted by women on horseback, covered from head to toe. You know, because one of the first questions you would ask is, in the case of elite women who were expected to practice parda, who were supposed to be secluded, how did they manage to ride in the open air, to be seen on horseback in public? Well, this is how they did it, by dressing up in a certain way, by adopting a certain attire which allowed them to ride, but also completely covered them from the public
Right.
to male gaze.
And you also
And
talk
there
about
are
Chand Bibi and Lakshmi Bai, and besides, of course, this very interesting painting. Were there details that emerged that surprised you when you were researching this particular bit? One that I found fascinating was how Hamida Bano rode to Umarkot in advanced stage of her pregnancy and miraculously delivered Akbar.
So this is actually Hamida Banu returning to her son after, and if he is duly reverential, he should be, because she followed his father into exile and ended up traveling through the deserts of Rajasthan on horseback at the height of her pregnancy. So it's extraordinary. It just goes to show what a hardy, resilient woman she was, besides being a good horsewoman, that she managed to deliver Akbar successfully. Right? So,
Right.
but we know that these Mughal women coming from a nomadic culture, horse-based culture in Central Asia, they were all trained to ride. You know, whether they rode for pleasure or for purposes of exercise, for pleasure, leisure, purposes of exercise, that's probably the circumstances under which they rode. Publicly, the highest echelon, the highest of the Mughal women, the queens, the princesses, the noble women, they would have traveled in palanquins or, in howdahs on elephant backs. And it's the female servants who would have ridden horses.
Right.
But you do have Peter Mundi, an English traveler traveling through Mughal India, who does say that women of a higher class tended to ride horses astride, whereas women of a lower class rode oxen. Right?
Right.
And importantly, they all ride astride. They sit with both their legs apart, as opposed to European women who until fairly recently used to ride side saddle, so they could decorously put both their legs to one side. So that's nice.
Yeah, and you have a reference which of that with where you detail this fascinating interaction between a British Indophile horsewoman Fanny Parks and Baiza Bai.
Yeah, no. So as I was telling you, textual references are very few, right? There are some passing references like she sat on a horse, she rode on a horse, but textual references suggestive of horsewomanship or telling of horsewomanship, or the circumstances under which women rode, their relationship with their horses, is not something that there's not very much of that. But thankfully, there's this 19th century reference. this Mem Sahab, this intrepid Mem Sahab, Fanny Parks, ends up encountering a bunch of Maratha princesses, and she sort of rides with them. Yeah, so they bond over that. They bond over their mutual enthusiasm for horses.
Right.
And they exchange notes. I mean, this is how European women ride. This is how Maratha women ride. So that is that's an absolutely lovely reference. And
Yes.
these Maratha women are completely shocked. How is it that European women manage to sit on a horse crooked? You know, how is it they manage
Right.
to ride side saddle? How is that even possible? And then Fanny Parks ends up riding astride like the Maratha women, and she says that, oh, you know, I felt like I could have jumped over the moon, right?
Right. Yes.
So yeah. So, and of course, Rani Lakshmi Bai was iconized on horseback. So she becomes a stock image. She's almost always represented on horseback as a warrior woman.
Right.
More surprising is the depiction of Chand Bibi. Again, this becomes standardized. This iconography of Chand Bibi hawking or hunting with a hawk on horseback becomes standardized. But there aren't any historical references to her having been, you know, I mean, there aren't any such historical references. There isn't an original portrait from her lifetime these paintings could have been based on. She is famous. Chand Bibi was a princess from the Deccan Sultanate, Ahmednagar, and
Right.
she became famous for sort of rallying the troops during a Mughal attack and getting the nobles and the troops of Ahmednagar to put up a fight. And to inspire them and motivate them, she uncovered her face, she revealed her face, and she appeared in public. So that is the moment for which she is best remembered.
Right.
But obviously ultimately she was killed, and as is often the case in patriarchal structures with unusual women and bold women. But she became a very well-loved historical figure of the Deccan. And from the 18th century onwards, all these paintings of her, these rather beautiful paintings of her on horseback, hawking on horseback, began to be presented. And I think it just has to do with the fact that by placing her on horseback, she, you're marking her out as, a bold woman, a warrior woman, right?
Right.
At the same time, she's very resplendently dressed. She's very elegantly dressed. She's hawking, which is an aristocratic part-time. So I think it resolved the contradiction, the dilemma of representing a highborn woman as a warrior, because that is not what they were that is not what was conventionally expected of them, right?
Right. Right.
Then one historical references I found to a Rajput noblewoman who, after the death of her husband, took over the running of the estate and would appear in public on horseback dressed as a man. So you have that reference, that women did ride. She was also subsequently killed. Sadly, that is the fate of women who are, avant-garde.
Yes.
But there are all these paintings from the Rajput courts of women on horseback. And it's just not possible that they're a figment of the artist's imagination. They're, of course, stock images, just like you have these stock images of women in various states of repose and leisure and pleasure. And you have these very romanticized images of women, of idealized beauties. You also have paintings of women on horseback, hunting, playing polo, etc. And they do become stock images. So basically the same, in both these cases, the woman is represented sitting on a horse in the same way. She is surrounded by other women, but they reflect the circumstances under which women of elite Rajput households would have ridden, amongst themselves or in the company of their husband or master in the case of concubines, within women's quarters, right? So I think just because there aren't a lot of textual references, we can't say that women didn't ride. I mean, all these paintings are a representation of that.
It's interesting to see how you rely on a lot of this art historical material. And one cannot help notice how your approach has been inclusive in accessing research material as well, as far as the book is concerned. You rummage through a wide range of art historical sources, including paintings, some of which you're sharing here.
Swati, I can't hear you. Very worrying.
Old and half Mughal empress comes up. Is it better? I hope it is. A caravanserai built by the powerful Mughal empress Noor Jahan comes up.
Yeah. So this is the one.
Better. Yeah. So take us through the process. Yes. Take us through the process and your experience of working with these art historical sources.
So I'm an art historian by training. So in any case, I was inclined to the visual representations or the art historical manifestations of the horse culture of India. Very often paintings and art historical sources, archaeological sites can shed light on, gaps in textual records, in written records. And also, as far as this book is concerned, because it was concerned with the all-encompassing, multifaceted place of the horse in Indian history, society, and culture, I had to, in any case, undertake an interdisciplinary research, right?
Right.
So, I mean, as far as the contribution of women to the horse culture of India is concerned, it's not just in terms of women riding, but also women facilitating, for example, that trade. That trade was voluminous. It was enormous. I mean, up in the 17th century, anything between 30,000 to 100,000 horses were imported annually. It was the single largest commodity of trade, along with bullion, and the single largest commodity of import into India. And a lot of Mughal women, so the Mughals were at pains to create the kind of infrastructure that enabled this trade to flow easily through India. And one of that was, so obviously building roads, securing roads, things like that. And they built caravanserais for traders to stop at. And a lot of Mughal women came forward. That became one of the medium. Architectural patronage became one of the ways in which women made their presence felt. And they were able to leave behind a historical legacy. Noor Jahan actually pioneered that. She turned out to be the first great female patron of architecture in Mughal India. And you have a Dutch merchant, a Dutch traveler, talking about how she builds these fabulous monuments in order to secure her legacy, in order to immortalize herself, right? And these caravanserais, this is a caravanserai built by Noor Jahan near Jalandhar. So basically on what is now known as the Great Trunk Road, historically connecting the northwest frontier with eastern India. So basically, the arterial road that ran through the heart of Mughal India and connected the two different ends of Mughal India. And you can imagine, these caravanserais, so these women were actually fostering trade. They were helping foster that trade. And, there are these references to all these courtyards. So all these caravanserais had a huge central courtyard. All the animals, the horses, the camels, etc., of the different traders being parked in the courtyard. Right. So this is another art historical source that I turn to.
Yes. One of the most powerful, I'm not sure how we're doing on time. I think we don't have much time. So I'll just, some of the important questions I don't think we should miss out on. One of the most powerful aspects of the book that is likely to resonate with the reader of today is how the book goes beyond the celebrated accounts of the elite and the horse to showcase the story of the unsung communities whose lives revolve around the horse and the other way around. And I found your section on Rajasthan fascinating also because I was telling you how serendipitously while reading it, I happened to be traveling through the remote Thar, where much of it locates itself, coincidentally for a research project that's also on nomadic pastoralism. So I like how you, I mentioned to you earlier, there are little things that one is curious about and has no idea of, such as where this locality Ratnada in Jaipur gets its name from. And I've always wondered where that name came from. And as you point out in the book, it's named after a dog which belonged to the Banjara community. So the question really is, did you decide to make the book inclusive when you began writing it, or did it emerge like that as you came upon important roles that were played by various communities while you were researching it?
Yeah, I didn't want to write a purely elitist history. The horse to a large extent is an elite animal. So obviously there was no escaping that. That is, much of its significance came from that. Much of its usage stemmed from that. So that is there, of course, the Mughal emperors and the Rajput kings and the rulers of the South. I mean, all of that is there, of course. But I was also concerned to talk about the horse culture of more offbeat, remote areas, like, for example, Manipur. Polo in Manipur is a big part of the story. It is in many ways the birthplace of modern polo. But if I'm talking about the horse being central to Indian culture, I mean, what culture am I talking about? If it was going to be central to Indian culture, it obviously had to be present in almost all aspects across gender, across class. It couldn't just have been restricted to one class of people. And yes, the Rajputs were the riders of horses predominantly. They were the riders of horses, they were the horse warriors, they played polo. But they weren't the ones, and they bred horses, but they weren't the only ones breeding horses, right? And moreover, they weren't trading in horses. In the case of Rajasthan, it was the Charans and the Bhats, two Bardic classes, and the Banjaras, the great carrier class historically of India, that did a lot of the horse breeding. And the epic of Babuji, the oral epic of Babuji, in which this Rajput chief, Babuji, is endowed with his miraculous horse by a Charan woman who is also a horse trader, apart from a cattle keeper, right? And there are all these legends of Charan goddesses bestowing favored Rajput leaders with horses. So that, and of course, the thing I think you can't forget if you actually had some experience of a horse is how crucial grooms are. The people who look after the horse. You know, the horse doesn't just spend its entire life on the polo ground or on the battleground. It wouldn't have historically. It spent a lot of its time in stable. It had to be grazed. It had to be looked after. It had to be cleaned, fed, etc., etc. So who were these people? You know, obviously the elite classes weren't the ones, cleaning out stables or cutting the grass. So then, of course, that took some investigation. I had to really use my imagination and hunt high and low for references. Luckily, I found some. And there are some rather wonderful paintings, actually, of... Okay, so I just quickly, because my cover encapsulates the spirit of the book, let me just quickly talk about it. Obviously, there is an elite rider at the heart of it, a man mounted on horseback. And in fact, the painting, this Pahadi painting, this iconic Pahadi painting by Nansuk, he's trailed by three noblemen also on horseback. But there's also a woman, right? A court performer, his paramour, who is on horseback, and there are also these two musicians on horseback, so lower classes. And then obviously these people, even if they are not on horseback, I mean, servant, the hookah bearers, the huntsman in the distance, they are all experiencing the horse. So this covered, so this is the image that we chose for the front cover. And then for the back cover, we chose this painting. There are lots of paintings of horses, of a horse with its groom. Like, for example, this painting is made by the master artist from Devgarh in Rajasthan, Bhakta. And of all of Bhakta's oeuvre, these paintings are the least studied. So even today, we tend to focus on paintings of the equestrian portraits of rulers and chiefs and emperors. But I wanted to put this painting on the back cover because here the horse is the central character. So it reminds us that a horse was not some sort of trade commodity or fighting machine. It was viewed as a very important creature. Individual horses were named, paintings of them were made. So this is a horse called Mira Bagas. And of course, the horse as an elite animal dwarfs the little groom, the lower status groom. But in a way, the groom's life, the groom's association with the horse is also recorded. And I was very keen to put that on the back cover. So I think that is what it is.
One of the interesting, striking things really that you talk about is how the caste hierarchy percolates to the horse world. How do you think that came about?
So like, for example, the horse, because the horse and the Rajput lord lend them each other's stature in these equestrian portraits of from Rajasthan, which after a while got quite standardized. Whereas sort of the attendant class, the class of the class of yak-tail bearers, or the hookah bearers, or the chap carrying the parasol or the sunshade, they become small diminished figures. So it is a reflection in art of that social hierarchy. So these paintings sort of don't these paintings tend to be seen as quite standardized. There's the ruler on horseback. Obviously the ruler would want to be depicted on horseback. But in the case of this painting, for example, the horse is very much at the heart of the painting in terms of the color, in terms of the technique. So the horse is the central character. The horse is an extension of the Rajput lord, and hence they sort of dominate the paintings. They loom large in the paintings. Whereas, the servant class, the attendant class appear as much smaller figures.
But you also talk about classes within the horses. You talk about hierarchy, caste hierarchy percolating within the horses.
Yeah, so within the Shalihotra tradition, horses were assigned caste. It goes to show how pervasive and how insidiously caste has worked historically in India. So, in terms of their appearance, in terms of their attributes, their temperament, they could be assigned to different castes. So, for example, a horse that smelt of roses, literally, was of the Brahmin caste. A horse that smelt of goats was of the Rajput class. I think, and then a horse that smelt of, I don't know, like something less offensive, like ghee or something, then that was a horse of the, Vaishya caste or the mercantile caste. Whereas a horse that smelt of mud or fish or, basically foul smelling, the foul smelling horse was of the Shudra caste. Right. So, so, I mean, in a way, it just goes to show that the horse was humanized.
Right.
It was seen as an extension of humans, right? But unfortunately, along the lines of the Indian caste system.
Yes. When we began talking about the book in the run-up to the session, you mentioned a tweet that I had put out with a video of Dapu Kanji, who unfortunately we've lost recently, singing a couplet or a doha, Ghodo Malani Bhalo, Karman Bikaner, which talks about horses, from how horses from Malani are great and camels from Bikaner. And in the book, you mention a whole range of folk songs from Rajasthan called Ghodo. What sort of a relationship of the nomadic pastoralist from this part with horses do these songs outline?
So, I mean, horses would be given, it's not like most castes in Rajasthan could own and ride horses. Certain prestigious rituals which were ultimately associated with the Rajputs, such as riding in your wedding or performing the Torana ceremony, by which the incoming bridegroom strikes the Toran. Yeah, the prospective bridegroom strikes the Toran at the entrance of the bride-to-be's house. I mean, these rituals were also adopted by a lot of other castes because they were associated with Rajputs who were the leading caste of Rajasthan. Only the lowest of the low were, castes that were considered the lowest of the low were prohibited from riding in their weddings, in their wedding processions on horses or performing the Toran ceremony from horseback. And I mean, there's the manifestation of that the manifestation of that continues to date when Dalit bridegrooms are prevented from riding to their weddings on horseback. A lot of the songs, a lot of these folk songs are concerned with our wedding songs, right? So, the bride is, the songs are of course performed by the caste musicians, for example, the Langas and the Manganyars, right? But in those songs, the bridegroom is sort of referring to her husband as this horse warrior, or her husband to be, or she's beseeching her beloved to come on horseback, those sort of songs. But then because the horse was in itself such a valued creature, there are some songs in which that are just dedicated to the song, to those horses. Like, for example, the horses of Malani were treasured across Rajasthan, Malani in Western Rajasthan, right? So it follows that there were a number of songs which were extolling those horses from Malani, right? So I think,
yes.
So identities were formed, not just elite identities. Like, for example, the Rajputs, the horse informed the rise of the Rajputs and the elite ruling class of Rajasthan. The Mughal, Akbar instituted the Mansabdari system by which the rank of an officer, how high he could rise within the Mughal setup, was determined by the number of horses he brought. Then, upcoming elite classes like the Rajputs and the Marathas, they adopted aristocratic practices such as horseback hunting, etc. So this we know. But we forget that, there was an entire industry surrounding the horse and a number of social identities formed around it. Like, for example, those bheels, those desert bheels who began to serve Rajputs as saises, they came to be known as Nayaks. Now it is an honorific by which most bheels like to be referred to. Urvi has ominously come on, which means time's up.
So yes, it is. And there was one final question which I had, which if Urvi lets me ask, I will ask. Otherwise, we'll open the floor.
No, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So, so Yashaswini, where do you think the tale of the horse is headed now, with an altered dynamics as far as its role is concerned, post mechanization?
Well, the horse is pretty much at the sidelines of human history now. Post mechanization. It's only used in certain remote areas, for transportation, for example. It's certainly not used in warfare. The 2 horse regiments of the Indian Army are ceremonial. there are the equestrian sports, it's very much an elite pastime, right? So, but, like the Pushkar, the enduring appeal of Pushkar, it reminds us, it is a link to that traditional horse culture, right? It is, or for example, Hola Mohalla, where the Nihangs ride horses in their traditional style. These are sort of the remnants of the pre-colonial horse culture of India before, it became Europeanized. So, I think that's where it's at.
Yes.
Pretty much on the margins of human history now.
Right. Yes.
The age of the horse is over.
Yes. With that, I think we should be headed towards opening the floor for questions from the audience. But thank you very much for all the insights you've shared during this conversation. And of course, the fascinating book, which I recommend very strongly to everyone who's watching. Here it is. This is how it looks. And, it looks beautiful. That's just the cherry on the cake, but it's a great book, really. A big thank you also to Meeta and the entire team of the Right Circle. Urvi for showing the patience that she just did, and for inviting me to do this. Thank you. Over to you, Urvi.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you, Yashaswini. In case any of you have any questions, just raise your hands and we'll unmute you.
There are a few questions on the question and answer option. So should I read them or?
Do you want to just read them out so Yashaswini can answer them?
All right, I'll read them out. So first question, we have 3 questions from Arvind. First one is, do we have detailed and reliable information on Ashwamedha Yagya performed by Maharaja Jai Singh II in Jaipur? If yes, then what do we know?
I would imagine that it is properly recorded. I think there would be a detailed account of it. I would have to read it to be able to comment on that specific yagya. But I would imagine the same Vedic hymns would have been recited, but obviously the circumstances under which the political circumstances under which it was practiced was very different. So it would have been symbolic rather than actually achieving the purposes of the Ashwamedh Yagya in the traditional sense.
Okay, the next question is, how does Marwari breed horse fit into the demand when Arabic horses were much more prized? Are the current stories we hear about Marwari horses being highly coveted true, or is it purely a marketing ploy?
No, so that's so funny. There was a time when surprisingly horses were hard to come by in Rajasthan. So the Delhi Sultanate practiced a policy by which it sort of hoarded the supply of horses, of not just horses, war animals, horses and elephants into India, and prevented its rival from getting their hands on these weapons effectively. So that in that time, horses, and also Rajasthan was historically camel country rather than horse country. So that was something quite surprising that I found. But horses from about the 16th century became more and more available in Rajasthan. Horses began to be bred in Rajasthan. There has been some genetic research on the Marwari horses, on the Marwari horse, and phylogenetically, it seems to have been bred from Arab Persian horses. So horses from the Middle East to a large extent. And there are also legends, by the way, of local mares being crossed with Arab horses to produce a distinctive Indian breed, the Marwari horse. The Rajputs, like the Marathas, mostly did ride local horses. I mean, the Mansabdars, the Rajput rulers and chiefs would have ridden, Central Asian Turki horses or horses from the Middle East, but the rank and file to a large extent rode local horses. So, no, the Marwari horse is a beautiful, valuable, historical creature of Rajasthan. But yeah, it wasn't known as the Marwari horse until recently. I mean, they were all just known as Desi horses. And finally, of course, it was classified as a distinctive breed and called the Marwari horse. And now there is justified, understandably, a great concern with preserving it in its pure form. And yeah, I hope it doesn't thankfully, it's not going to become extinct like the Indian breed of the Deccan. The Deccani horse or the Bhima pony has become extinct.
Okay, so we have another question from Prem Kagu. First of all, she wants to say congratulations for well-researched book, Yashaswini.
Oh, thank you.
She wants to know how long it took to collect beautiful illustrations and details and the challenges you faced in this journey.
Yeah, so I took a very long time, by the way, to write this book. I took 5 years. And, the art I was more or less aware of as an art historian. But yes, once, like somewhere in the book, I write that if one is prepared to look for it, the horse appears everywhere, even as it seems to be nowhere. The nowhere, of course, being the modern mechanized era. In the modern mechanized era, like I said, it's at the margins of society. But once you look, you find that the horse has left its trail in Indian art. There are so many different kinds of paintings with the horse represented in some form or the other. And so I would say it took about 5 years for me to research and write the book.
Okay, so we have the next question from Aruna Pandey. So I'm allowing her to talk. So she'll be asking you directly.
Oh. Hi, Aruna.
Hi. Well, thank you, both of you, for streamlining this wonderful discussion. And you have, of course, stretched over many number of things that usually, we think about, but we don't fully understand or go into. Now, I have a host of questions, but I know that it would be okay to just ask you one or two questions. The first one is that the horse has been a symbol of loyalty and intensity and courage and all these positive qualities. So, but at the same time, it is considered not very lucky to hang up a painting in your home, of wild horses. So, is there another side to the image of the horse, or the symbolical relevance of the horse as an iconic figure? Of course, it has taken. In present times, the horse is very. It's symbolically. People might have even forgotten. These basic qualities that were there as an iconic, as the horse being an iconic figure. But how is it? How has the transition been, and what status does the horse have in today's India, where a normal family, an average family, does not get to really get into the world of horses? I think, that's all I would like to bother you with. So thank you very much. Yeah.
So no, thank you. So yeah, of course, the story of Rana Pratap, the Count of Rana Pratap and his relationship with Chetak being India's most famous horse. That embodies the bonds of loyalty, trust, dependence that once existed between humans and horses. At the end of the day, like I said, you're not dealing with a lifeless thing. You're dealing with a very pronounced creature. And bonds were formed. Obviously, there were acts of cruelty, right? But bonds were formed between horses, individual horses, and their masters. And the tale of Rana Pratap and Chetak embodies that beautifully, right? And and lots of paintings were produced of individual horses. So the Mughal prince Dara Shikoh, he had a painting of his horse made. The horse is called Dilpasand. Even the names are very suggestive. They are affective. You had names like Dilpasand, beloved of my heart, Hamdam, or Mehboob, right? So these names themselves are very telling. As far as the paintings of wild horses are concerned, I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that before. But yeah, a wild horse represents a certain untamed energy. And maybe that was seen to have a negative connotation. So, which is why within the epic of Babuji, there are references to Babuji coming of age by taming, breaking wild horses, right? So, the horse is obviously, a wild horse is not that as desirable as a domesticated horse. Does that answer the question?
I'm sure it did.
Okay.
So we have the next question from Dr. Chavra, and he'll be asking you the question directly.
Hello, Dr. Chavda. Dr. Chavda is my, where is Dr. Chavda?
So I'm unmuting him.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hello. So this is my hero, the one person who read the entire book before it went to press. And made sure that I made no glaring errors.
No. It's a superb book. I only want to make a comment. I don't want to ask a question.
Thank you.
And the comment is simply this, that writing a history of an animal is a very new genre. And this is a very welcome addition to it, because arguably this is possibly the only book that I know of a large mammal which has been domesticated, which has been historically recorded. And I think the work that you've done will live for decades and centuries. I think no one else has attempted this. And I would like to congratulate for this.
Thank you so much, Divya. Coming from you, it means a lot. And I couldn't have done it without you. And you have literally pioneered animal history in India. So I am super grateful.
I think you're most kind and overkind, I think. Only one other comment. You mentioned earlier on how the horse did not become a very major icon in the iconography of India. The only god that rode a horse was Kuber, and Kuber has always been sidelined.
Oh yeah. Oh, I forgot about Kuber. Yeah.
Kuber rode a horse, and his poor god has been sidelined. Who prays to Kuber these days? Though everyone should. At least I'd like to pray to him. He's god of wealth.
Yeah.
And
crazy.
And Shambhunath ji, the Jain Tirthankar, his chinha is a horse.
Right. Yeah.
But congratulations. I don't think, I always say that these kind of books are the best things that could have happened to these animals, because the poor horse cannot talk. If he could write a history about human interaction, it would be very different.
Yeah, that would be the true history of the horse. That would be the authentic history of the horse.
Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We have one more question from Professor Neeru Misra. So I'm allowing her to talk now.
Hi, Yashaswini.
Hello, Professor. How are you?
Hi, fine. And hi, Swati, and also Meeta. It's so nice to be, connect with you three here online. I don't have a question, but I really wanted to compliment, and as my predecessor did, for excellent work, which you have done, a real pioneer work on the horse. I haven't heard, anybody thinking so much about an animal in the art history field. And I'm very glad that you mentioned about Manipur, because I'm visiting faculty there in Culture University, and Manipur is the place from where polo originated. So I'm very glad that, and for the excellent rendering, presentation, collection of the images, and your far thinking in, deepest of the material and subjects you could have, one could have thought of while doing this research. So excellent work, and all the best for your future endeavors. And I must compliment you, and I feel proud of being acquainted with you at some time in National Museum Institute.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. It means so much coming from you.
Best wishes.
Thank you.
I think that's everyone. Thank you so much, Yashaswini. Thank you, Swati. This was a wonderful conversation. I can't wait to
Thank you so much, Urvi.
start
Thank you
reading
for
the book
inviting
now.
me.
It's going to be so much fun to read it. Before I let all of you go, I must thank all our partners in this, Prabhakatan Foundation, Shri Cement, SAS Women, and the Spagia Foundation. Thank you so much, everyone. For those of you who have not sent your postal addresses already, please send them within the next 48 hours and we'll send you a copy of Yashaswini's book. Thank you everyone. Until the next Right Circle, we'll see you soon.
Okay, see you. Thank you.
See you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Yashaswini, Swati. Bye-bye.
Swati, where Swati
Bye-bye.
disappeared? Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.